Good morning. This is the weekly VOLTHA TST meeting. What is today's date? It is January 30th. Month's almost over. Let me see. We have a bunch of updates around release and a few other things for this go around. If anybody has anything they'd like to cover before we get into all of this stuff, feel free to bring it up. Okay, with that, I guess we can dive into it. So the VOLTHA release is gotten quite a bit farther along. We're getting pretty close to final pressing. Come on, there, lost my pointer. So the release notes, the grid for like the ONOS components, I've got to regenerate this because I've got a patch in the queue. And a lot of the version strings and the URLs and the artifact URLs, the Docker images, all the links, that's all been updated. There's a Sphinx problem right now. There's a patch in the queue. I just have to apply it to fix this. But the release notes are, at least the release matrix and the versions are all up to date. Included also in the latest version of the release grid, I included links to some artifacts that were not included earlier. Some of them are Docker images for like the VOLTHA Protos repository, the VOLTHA libgo repository. They exist, but they've not been updated for a while. They're marked as stale on the grid. We'll have to look into those and see what happened to them. There were automated jobs at one point in time, but some of these artifacts have not been updated in at least 4 years. So something is either not running or we need to initiate a job to actually do the publishing. Docs.voltha.org was updated. They put a section in there for how to check out from the release branch and create a patch on the release branch. If you have to do a bug fix or anything. If people have time, if you can read through this, and if you have any suggestions or would like to make additions or whatever, by all means, feel free. And if anything is not clear, let me know. For ONOS components, we've published we've technically published all of them. There's only one question lingering. We had to do republishing on a couple of them because a few version items were fixed. This was a bit odd. So we have the Kafka component that was published. It's 2.13.0 on Maven Central. That's all good. I don't know why, but both the API artifact and the app artifact for Kafka, they do not seem to exist. And this is the only one that's behaving like this. I would expect you could search and find older versions of the Kafka package, but there's nothing there, at least not searching or trying explicit paths that should exist. So, I don't know what to make of that right now, but we'll figure it out.
In its source repository, it does not have a API or app folders. Probably never generate API and app.
Okay, that would probably do it.
Yeah, the only problem, I checked your Slack message this morning, and as you said in the Maven UI, GUI, you see that the version 2.13.0 is released yesterday.
Yeah.
But I wrote a message on Slack to you, a response in repo one.maven.org link. There is no update. You can't see the artifacts are updated. Only the metadata file is updated. So let's check it and be sure that it is released.
Okay.
By the way, I did the last update to the VOLTHA ONOS patch to test again, and we will see what's going on there as well.
Yeah, it was this one, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I'll check on it. The Maven, this is the central Maven repository in addition to that other one.maven. So I'm definitely confident it has published. That's odd. It's not showing up in that other repository, but yeah, I'll go poke at it after the meeting then.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Just an FYI for the publishing times for Onos. So when we initially tried to publish 5.12.1, it the the job was initiated. It ran for about 4 days, and it looked like it was hung. That was terminated. We redid the patch as 5.12.2, and there was a Jackson component version upgrade that was included in 5.12.1. That was backed out, and we were able to build 5.12.2. I think that ran in under 24 hours, but we need to add some timestamps to the job so we have something to gauge how long these are running for. But the Onos component publishing continues to take like several hours, upwards of 10, before they're finally published. Um, and, uh, we're going to need to dig into the pipeline and the Nexus server and all the pieces that are in there because it's a bit of a black box right now. The job started in Jenkins. It gets forwarded over to Nexus as a staging repository. The staging repository kicks back to Jenkins to actually do part of the build. And then from there, it probably goes back to Nexus, but the publishing out to Maven Central happens at that point, and we're taking up an ungodly amount of time while this job runs. So we're gonna have to start profiling it and try and figure out where these bottlenecks are coming in. On a good note, the Kafka Onos repository seemed to publish fairly quickly, relatively speaking. But yeah, that needs to be looked into. And FYI for some of the Onos dependencies that are in POM XML, this turned up earlier in the week. So there, within the POM XML, there's a dependency on Onos dependency, which is currently version 2.5.5 in most of the POM XML files. For the Gustavos patch that Mahir was working on, we're going to need to update to version 2.5. Or the Docker image needs to update to 2.5.8, and Gustavos patch is going to bring it up to 2.5.9. But for this release, we're going to have a little bit of a discrepancy. The other components that have already been built are using 2.5.5. VOLTHA Onos, once we rebuild it, is going to be, sorry, the repo VOLTHA Onos, the VOLTHA repo, will be dependent on 2.5.9 as the dependency. So we're going to have a little bit of a discrepancy there until after the release. The reason we're going forward to continue using 2.5.5 is it's a known quantity. And if we update it, we may run into more problems that affect the release. And worse, it could change some existing behavior, which would add a lot of uncertainty in the libraries. So we're going to go with the release with mostly 2.5.5. Both the Onos will be using 2.5.9, and we'll update this discrepancy, all of these versions after the release. And there was one other item that turned up in some of the POM XML files for the Onos components. The API version for some of the components have been hard-coded as version 1.0.0. Not sure if it's just not used or that's not been maintained, but we'll have to, remove the hard-coded values and update it to the API package that's actually being published for the components. And we'll parameterize the POM XML file so that the version can be updated just like we update the package and the other component versions, rather than having this hard-coded version, which has gone a little bit stale. Let me see. So that was the on the ONOS dependencies and what's gone on around ONOS. Are there any questions about any of the components or the versioning or the artifacts or pretty much anything? Okay. So getting the components built is one of the dependencies for rebuilding some of the VOLTHA repositories. So now that all of those are out of the way, we can continue the building VOLTHA ONOS, which Mahir is working on a patch that Gustavo submitted. So that should be going in soon. One odd problem that came up while it was trying to tag and branch the VOLTHA Go repository and the Open OLT adapter repository. These are the only ones this has shown up on. When you try to, after it's been branched and tagged, they exist in the repository. If you try and update some of the peripheral files, like the .git release file, which points at the branch rebasing and merging goes against, those jobs submitted on the release branch are reporting that it can't find a version to build. There's a Groovy script that's being run for these two repositories that may be part of it, but that needs some debugging. So the major pieces right now that still need attention are reviewing the versions in the Helm chart repository, reviewing the VOLTHA system tests to make sure like tools like BBSim and VoltCTL have been updated for release. And there's a boatload of JIRA tickets that are open for release that need to be closed. If anybody would like to go in and start poking around at these, by all means, feel free. And the rest of the repositories will be tagged and branched as well. One other FYI for ONOS, there is some inconsistencies in the POM XML files. Some of them look like they're intentional. We start out with a repository name like Kafka ONOS. Kafka ONOS. For machine learning, it's mock-learning. The repository names don't match up direct as one-to-one to the packages that we're building. Like Kafka, the repository Kafka ONOS is used to produce the component or the package Kafka. And the mock-learning repository creates the component mock-learn. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy there. We found another one in VOLTHA ONOS around IGMP proxy. So the dependency that VOLTHA has on the ONOS component is IGMP proxy. But if you look in the POM XML file for VOLTHA ONOS, it's a little misleading because the dependency is IGMP.API. And this is exacerbated because there's a repository, I don't know if it's still active or not, that's named IGMP API. Mahir dug into the dependencies and found out, if you go down a few layers, the dependency is actually on IGMP proxy, not IGMP. So that's another thing we need to fix, is updating the POM XML names so that they're one-to-one to avoid this potential source of confusion. Okay, so is there any, I know that's a lot. Are there any questions, or would anybody like to add anything? Okay, well, we can move on to the first item of the day. You see, with the migration over to the Linux Foundation, there was a question of what domain name would be appropriate to use for the project when it moves over. And Mahir was going to bring that up today. So if Mahir, if you'd like to grab that.
Actually, question was coming from Michelle. Michelle, do you want to jump in and ask the question to community so that we can go ahead?
Sure. So right now, we're trying to split out the broadband projects from under the ONF umbrella. And so we'll be setting up a new wiki, a new website, things that need a new domain. And the current domain, I think, that has been associated with broadband for a while is cord. So it's, this transition is an opportunity to move into something that's a little bit more contemporary regarding the broadband project. And we do own the domain voltha.org. And so that would be the recommendation, is to switch over to that domain and set up the new website and the new wiki under voltha.org, which is a little bit in keeping with the current broadband branding. So we just need the community or TST to kind of weigh in on that and see if that's the direction you want to go, or if you have suggestions for a different domain, we can see if something else is available, if people have any strong feelings.
Oh, yeah, Volta.org actually sounds good to me. No objections about that.
Okay, well, if anybody has any other thoughts that come up later, feel free to email me. Otherwise, later this week, when the transition officially closes, we can move forward with setting up the volta.org domain. But we probably won't be doing that until Friday at the earliest. So there's a little bit of time if anyone wants to provide additional feedback. Just feel free to reach out.
Okay. So to be sure, this will affect the Garrett and Jira. And is there anything else, Joey?
Wiki, Confluence. Trying to think if there's anything else. docsvoltha.org is already under voltha.org. So that would persist.
So do we need to do a lot of changes in, I don't know, in Jira or Gerrit or Jenkins jobs, etc.? I mean, the question is here is, do we have a long time of interruption during our, edits, work, etc.?
I would say the interruption is going to be minimal. This is, things may change, but there will probably be a period of time where both of the cord org and the Volta org exist simultaneously. So Jenkins can still pull from patches from garrett.opencore.org. As things are moving over, we'll have to go in to update the pipelines, specifically the one that looks up the Jira tickets, and change that from looking at jira.opencore.org to look at jira.voltha.org, if that's what it ends up being. But we wouldn't be just pulling one server out and run the risk of breaking everything on day one.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah. And if anybody knows of any potential problems, yeah, definitely give us a heads up on those. But yeah, we'll be moving everything over. Let me see. Okay, so for item number 2, while we were working on the release, Mahir noticed that there was a repository device management interface that is not included in the Volta release. And Mahir, if you'd like to take that one again.
Yes. Yeah, for device management, we have a device management interface, and it has a repo and protos defined in there as the device management interface. I think this should be a part of our release, Volta releases, but we saw that it is not currently part of our release process. So at least for the next release, I propose to take this also into the release process and also release the DMI interface.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Actually, you're, actively you, Amit, are doing changes in this repo. So do you think this should be a part of release, and we should release this also as part of Volta?
You
Um,
broke up a little bit here when.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, the device management interface, yes, it has to be part of the release.
Okay.
Okay.
Because the DMI interfaces, which are all the vendors use for managing the OLT,
Yes.
so will be referred to this. So yes, it has to be part of the release.
Okay, then let's plan it, Joy, and then take it to the as part of the release for the next one.
Okay, no worries. Let me see. So the next item, I thought of something last week when I was at, we flew out to the Linux Foundation, Michelle, David, and I. I had an interesting idea. We may be able to, we have a lot of the Python modules that we're using in the system for documentation generation, the testing harness, it's used in a bunch of places. A lot of the versions of the modules we have gone, they're fairly stale. Python's above, God, it's way above 3.10 right now. Some of the dependencies are on 3.7 and 3.6 and 3.7. I had an idea last week. We may be able to bulk upgrade some of the modules on a per repository basis, selectively update them so we don't run the risk of breaking the world. And that may be able a path to get things up to date so we can then consider upgrading the Python interpreter after to pull that up into something that's actually released by the Python Foundation. The way I think we could end up doing this is we have makefile targets that create a virtual env, and it's based on a config file requirements.txt. So basically when you run make lint, make build, make test, make whatever, one of the actions that make performs is it creates the virtual env for you. What we could do is modify that a little bit, do the virtual env installation as we currently do. Requirements.txt is incomplete. It only has a subset of the dependencies that we need. We could add a few extra actions to that. After we do the virtual env installation, you can do pip freeze, which will capture all of the modules at the current version. So we would have a complete list to filter later on. Then do an extra step where you manipulate the contents of the requirements.txt file. Like for VOLTHA docs, we could start upgrading the Sphinx modules and then simply just reinstall or remove and then reinstall the virtual env package again. That basically would allow us to selectively upgrade packages. Like in the case of VOLTHA docs, we could upgrade the Sphinx tool to be able to do documentation generation, and the setup, we could use it as, it would be a temporary addition, but you can include it as Git submodules, and basically on a per repository basis, just upgrade the modules you want. And that way we could address individual repositories, upgrading sets of packages, rather than upgrading everything and risking breaking the world, which we would currently be looking at today. But that's just an FYI. I may play around with that a little bit later on after the release. Okay, so with that, does anybody have anything they'd like to add, or any items or questions, comments? I know that's a lot to digest. And if anybody wants to play around with the Python setup or the make files, that's fair game too. Okay. Let's see. Okay, well, the floor is open if anybody would like to add anything, so I guess that's the last call on that. Okay, I guess thanks everybody for joining.
Thank you, June.
Thanks.
See you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Yep. Bye.